So this was either a Texas switch or they snuck in a cut right there because that person coming in the doorway was a stunt double, but this is Anthony Mackie. In order to figure out what your character's objective is.
That's why I'm like,
Enola is taking down Mr. Bowler Hat. Hey friends! John here, and welcome to The Martial Actor. Today, I, a black belt, will be reacting to The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, these are all clips from the first episode titled New World Order, and I'll be reacting to new episodes as they come out, so make sure you hit the subscribe button, click that bell if you want to get notified, and let's dive right in.
Okay, switching to plan B. Hey!
This is Batroc the Leaper. The last time we saw him was in Captain America the Winter Soldier, and he fought Captain America. Now, this is an interesting development for the series, but he is played by a dude named George St-Pierre, and George St-Pierre is a two-time UFC champion in both welterweight and middleweight divisions, and he is crazy good. He's like widely regarded as one of the most talented fighters the UFC's ever had, so I was super psyched to see him back in this show. Now this was a really interesting shot. So this was either a Texas switch or they snuck in a cut right there because that person coming in the doorway was a stunt double, but this is Anthony Mackie. And you can tell that Anthony Mackie has been working on his kicks because those look pretty good. The flexibility could be a little bit better, but they look really strong. Now, a really interesting thing to think about is he used his wings as a shield there for the bullets, but at the end of Endgame, Captain America gave him the Captain American shield. So it immediately makes you as an audience member think, why isn't he using the shield to block the bullets? Where is the shield? Why is he using his wings? And Batroc comes back in with a flying kick, and that looks so good. And we get this really cool, like, shaky cam fight sequence between Falcon and Batroc. Now you can't exactly see what's going on too well because, again, it's shaky cam mixed with really quick cuts, but it's really entertaining to watch. And now we get this really interesting evolution of the fight scene where they move locations and they go out of the plane and they get into these wingsuits, which I think is the first time we've seen this kind of thing in the MCU universe, which is really, really cool. I really like when shows try new things. And this makes a lot of narrative sense because Falcon, as a superhero, is most comfortable in the air. So it's really interesting to do a fight scene in the air. Now, these kind of shots are mixed in with a lot of like CG, but like this shot right here, they probably just threw a GoPro onto someone who was actually a wingsuit like flyer and got that footage, which is really, really cool. And we get some environmental obstacles because Sam's wingsuit is like, has a broader width than the other wingsuit divers. And then we come in with these helicopters and it's just like stacking these obstacles against Sam, which is narratively interesting because Falcon is not a stereotypical superhero. He's just a person with a super suit. So it's harder for him to deal with these kinds of obstacles. Now I love that we get to see some Red Wing stuff here too, because Red Wing in the comics is a pet falcon that the superhero Falcon has. In the MCU universe, they changed it to make it like a drone kind of thing. But I think it's a really interesting choice, and I love seeing the relationship between like Falcon and Red Wing. It's really cool. Now, I want to point out another thing as well. Falcon as a superhero is much more lethal than Captain America, which I think is interesting because, again, he's not a superhero. He doesn't have superpowers. So Captain America and other superheroes, there's a difference in power, and that gives them a luxury where they can exert mercy if they want. Whereas I think Falcon, because he's just a person, doesn't have that same luxury, which is really, really interesting. That was a really good elbow from Anthony Mackie. And again here, he just like straight up blows up that helicopter. All of those people are dead. Like there's no saving them.
Heads up, you're about to fly into Libyan airspace.
And I assume they have
And
a
this
problem
was a
with
really
that.
interesting like geopolitical aspect to bring in. So Libya as a country has been in some type of civil war for like the past 10 years. There's a ton of civil unrest, and so if America were to cross into Libyan airspace without permission, it could potentially cause an international incident, and we would face ramifications from the UN. And so that is kind of a big deal, and it's interesting that they brought that up in the MCU. I liked seeing it. I liked having it grounded into a more realistic perspective.
He's outnumbered.
And we get some like more Michael Bay-ish kind of explosions here, which are always fun to see. And that was like a really intense moment. And I really like how they're mixing in these shots of Falcon's face, because it gives you more of like an emotional context of what he's feeling while he's like flying through the air and these explosions are happening. It's also very reminiscent of like Iron Man type of stuff. So yeah, like seeing it.
just did.
And that was like a really cool thing to just see. And then Batroc flies out of the helicopter. So you don't really get to find out like why he was there. You don't get to find out who he was working for. He wasn't ever part of Hydra. So it'll be interesting to see if he comes back in the show. I'm hoping he does, because again, George St-Pierre is an amazing fighter, and I love seeing the stuff that he has to bring to the table. Skipping forward, now we get to see the Winter Soldier in action. And one of the things that makes me really excited about this show is the idea that we get to see more of him as a character. I've been a fan of Sebastian Stan since way back when he did The Covenant. And so I'm, yeah, very excited to see more of his stuff. Now, because he's coming in and he's wearing the mask and he's being very lethal to all of these people, it really makes you wonder if it's like happening in real time or if this is some type of flashback or something.
Hail Hydra.
And especially with that line, like it's very clear that he is acting on behalf of Hydra, which no longer exists. So it leans towards this idea that this is either a memory or a dream sequence or something. But really all of that fighting only lasted like less than a minute, so it was really just a taste of what I'm hoping more to come. They opened the show with like almost an 8-minute sequence of Falcon and like all this awesome stuff from him. So I'm really hoping in future episodes that they'll do the same kind of thing for Bucky. Moving forward to the last part of the episode, this dude's name is Officer Torres, but his real name is Danny Ramirez, and he's relatively a new actor. I haven't seen him in anything in the past, but I think he does a good job, and I want to see more of him in the future. But he has come to Switzerland, and he's tracking the Flag Smashers, which is like a new terrorist organization that I'm assuming are going to be the main antagonists of this show. He described himself earlier as the eyes on the ground for Falcon, which I think is really just gonna put him in a very strong sidekick role for the show. So that'll be interesting to see. So this is a pretty cool shot right here, but they cheated the stunt. So they make you believe that this dude jumped out of like a 4-story window, but you don't actually see him jumping. So they definitely cheated that somehow. However, it brings to mind the fact that this dude has to have superpowers of some kind, because a normal person could not jump out of a 4th-story window and land without rolling or anything and come away unscathed. So this is an interesting development. Now this is a cool stunt. So He throws the dude, but then after he like rolls over him, that roll was completely unnecessary. It was just there for flash, but it was cool to see. And then he kicks this dude. That dude was definitely on a wire getting pulled back, and it confirms again that this guy definitely is super powered. We're dealing with a new nemesis here. And so he grabs Torres' wrist, he gets him in a wrist lock. That wrist lock wouldn't actually work because you have to grab the meat of the thumb, and he didn't. He was just grabbing the wrist. But then he throws Torres, and Torres' stunt double gets a really cool flip. The stunt double added a cool tuck in the middle of the flip, which is cool to see. It's like a cool little flair that you can add to put your own little twist onto a stunt that happens a lot. So that's cool, and I appreciate seeing it. I really liked how the first episode of the show went. Now, to be honest, I wasn't really sure what to expect because after watching WandaVision, they really took a lot of creative liberties and creative risks with that show, and I ended up liking how they paid off, but it was so out of their wheelhouse, it was so out of left field that I really did not know what to expect with The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So this, for me, feels like a really good return to form. It's returning to action sequences that are very polished, very well put together. There wasn't a ton of hand-to-hand combat per se, but I really hope that the Winter Soldier is going to get more of that in the future. Now, I do have to say, I really like how much time and energy they're spending to ground this narrative into an emotional space. That was my favorite thing about WandaVision, really diving into her backstory as a character, the grief that she is experiencing throughout a bunch of these movies, and how that grief has manifested in problems for the world that they are creating. It was really well done, and I feel like they're using the same type of emotional depth with both the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. The Falcon's dealing with consequences for the blip and how it affected his family while he was gone, and he's also dealing with like taking the mantle of Captain America and what that means for him as a person and as a black man, and it's really interesting to watch. And then the Winter Soldier is dealing with past ghosts of consequences from his activities as the Winter Soldier, how he's dealing with the weight and repercussions of his actions during that time, which is just so interesting from a psychological standpoint. So I'm really interested to see how they continue to take this plot-driven narrative, but ground it in this emotional subtext and see how they resolve their emotional issues in the way that they are framing this plot. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of the episodes, and I cannot wait to see what comes next. Stick around for episode 2 next week, and that's all I've got for you today. So take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.